All right, welcome. Today, we are diving deep into a really big question. How do you actually truly make a change that sticks? We're going to break down James Clear's incredible book, Atomic Habits, and really get to the bottom of how these tiny 1% improvements can completely transform your life. So let's get into it. We've all been told that to get massive results, you have to take massive action. It's that go big or go home mentality, right? But let's be honest, how often does that actually work before we just completely burn out? Atomic Habits kicks off by challenging this exact idea, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the real secret isn't in those giant leaps, but in the tiny, consistent steps we take every single day. Think about it for a second. Every year, we start with so much motivation. We're going to get fit, we're going to read more, learn a new skill. But then, a few weeks, maybe a month in, we find ourselves right back where we started. It's such a common frustration. Well, it turns out this happens because we're often trying to change the wrong thing, or we're going about it in completely the wrong way. Today, we're going to unpack this system that fixes that. And this slide right here, this perfectly illustrates the core idea of the entire book. Just look at the math. If you can get just 1% better each day, by the end of the year, you'll be 37 times better. It's incredible. But the flip side is also true, and kind of scary. A 1% decline each day brings you down to nearly zero. This is the shocking compounding power of our daily habits. So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at why these small habits have such a huge impact. Then we'll get into what is probably the most important shift you can make, changing your identity, not just your actions. After that, we'll dive into the practical 4-step framework for building any habit you want. And finally, we'll cover how to master your environment and beat procrastination for good. Okay, let's start with the big picture. We have this tendency to focus on these huge, defining moments, but our lives are really just the sum of our daily choices. The results you're seeing in your life today, they're simply a lagging measure of the habits you repeated yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. This really says it all, doesn't it? You get what you repeat. Your physical health is a lagging measure of your eating and exercise habits. Your knowledge is a lagging measure of your learning habits. Over time, that tiny gap between good habits and bad habits becomes a massive canyon. Time becomes your best friend when you have good habits, and your absolute worst enemy when you have bad ones. Okay, now this next idea, this is arguably the most powerful concept in the entire book. Real, lasting change isn't about the outcome you want, it's about the person you want to become. It's all about shifting your identity. And this comparison just makes it so clear. An outcome-focused goal, like I need to finish a book, is temporary. Once you do it, it's over. But when you shift to an identity, I am a reader, well, that changes everything. It becomes a permanent part of how you see yourself, and that belief guides all of your future actions. So this is the crucial point. The goal isn't just to run a marathon, it's to become a runner. The goal isn't to write one novel, it's to become a writer. You see, every single time you perform a habit, you're casting a vote for the type of person you want to be. And with enough of those votes, enough of those tiny 1% actions, you start to believe it yourself. So if changing your identity is the what, we need to talk about the how. How do we actually do this? Well, that's where we get to the practical toolkit. James Clear gives us this simple but incredibly powerful framework he calls the 4 laws of behavior change. This is how we actually build those identity-based habits. It turns out every single habit, whether it's good or bad, follows a 4-step loop inside our brain. First, there's a cue, then a craving, then a response, and finally, a reward. The cue gets your brain's attention. The craving gives you the motivation. The response is the habit itself, and the reward satisfies that craving. So, to build a good habit, all we have to do is hack this loop. And here they are, the 4 laws. To create a good habit, you make the cue obvious, the craving attractive, the response easy, and the reward satisfying. And to break a bad habit, you just invert them. Make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying. It's so simple and elegant, right? Okay, let's break each one down. The first law is all about the cue. A lot of us think we lack motivation, but what we really lack is clarity. So you have to be super specific. Don't just say, I'm going to meditate. Say, I will meditate for 1 minute at 7 a.m. in my living room. This is what's called an implementation intention. You're literally giving your habit a time and a space to live, making it totally obvious when and where you need to act. Next step is Law 2, and this one targets the craving. I mean, let's be real. If a habit isn't attractive, we're just not going to stick with it. The more appealing something is, the more likely it is to become a habit. So the big question is, how do we engineer a habit to make it, irresistible? Here are two fantastic strategies. First, something called temptation bundling. This is where you link an action you need to do with an action you want to do. For example, I get to watch my favorite guilty pleasure show, but only while I'm on the treadmill. Second, you have to leverage social influence. We are so influenced by the people around us. If you want to read more, join a book club. Your desired behavior literally becomes the normal behavior for the group. All right, on to the third law, which is all about the actual response phase. This law is based on a fundamental truth about human nature. Our brains are wired to be lazy. We will always naturally gravitate toward the option that requires the least amount of effort. And we can actually use this to our advantage. So the key is to reduce the friction for your good habits. You want to eat healthier? Spend some time on Sunday chopping up fruits and veggies so they're easy to grab. You want to go to the gym in the morning? Lay out your workout clothes the night before. And for bad habits, you do the complete opposite. You increase the friction. Hide the junk food on a high shelf, unplug the TV, and put the remote in another room. Make it a hassle. And that brings us to the final and absolutely crucial law that closes the habit loop, making it satisfying. Just think about how our brains work. They evolved to want instant gratification. If a behavior doesn't feel good right now, we're probably not going to do it again. That's why every new habit needs some kind of immediate reward to make it stick. So how do we make a habit satisfying? First, give yourself a small immediate reward. After you exercise, maybe you enjoy a healthy smoothie that you really love. Second, use a habit tracker. There is something so satisfying about putting a big X on a calendar. You create this visual streak and you won't want to break the chain. And the most important rule of all here is to never miss twice. Look, missing once is an accident. Missing twice is the start of a whole new bad habit. Now, we've talked about the 4 laws, especially making cues obvious and making actions easy. Both of those point to one critical factor that is so important it really deserves its own section: your environment. It has this powerful, almost invisible influence on our behavior, and it's one of the most reliable drivers of habit formation. This quote just says it all. You might think you have a ton of self-control, but willpower is a finite resource. It's like a muscle that gets tired. A much better long-term strategy is to just design an environment where you don't even need to use it. Make the cues for your good habits obvious and visible, and make the cues for your bad habits totally invisible. Okay, let's talk about the biggest enemy of building any good habit: procrastination. You know that feeling of just not wanting to start? Fortunately, there is a brilliantly simple rule pulled straight from Law 3 that can help us overcome it every single time. And here it is, the 2-minute rule. The idea is that any new habit you start should be so ridiculously easy that it takes less than 2 minutes to do. See, the goal here isn't to get amazing results right away. The goal is simply to master the art of showing up. Because think about it, you can't improve a habit that doesn't even exist yet. This slide just illustrates it perfectly. You take a huge goal like read 30 books a year, and you just scale it all the way down until it's so easy you can't possibly say no. It becomes read every day, then read 1 page, and finally your 2-minute starting ritual is just open the book. I mean, come on, anyone can open a book. And once you've started, it's so much easier to keep going. So the 2-minute rule is perfect for getting you off the starting block. But once you've mastered showing up, how do you stay motivated for the long haul? Well, that's where something called the Goldilocks rule comes in. We experience peak motivation when we're working on something that's right on the edge of our abilities. Not so easy that we get bored, but not so hard that we fail and get discouraged. The key to long-term success is always finding that just right challenge that keeps you engaged. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into atomic habits, the real question isn't what you learned today, but what you're going to do with it. You have the framework now. You understand the incredible power of 1% improvements, of identity based change, and you have the four laws. So, the only question left is this: what is the one small 2-minute habit you can start today that will cast the very first vote for the person you want to become? Thanks for joining us.